The day my greedy daughter and her husband won $43 million in the lottery, they kicked me out. We don't need your pathetic pension cash anymore. Just go die somewhere else. They went pale when I laughed and said, "Sweetie, did you even read whose name is on that lottery ticket?" Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, let me tell you my story. My life for the past 5 years had been a study in the art of making myself smaller. I had learned to walk more softly, to take up less space in the armchair, to make my opinions so mild and agreeable that they were practically invisible. I was Martha Washington, a 68-year-old widow, and I was a guest in my own daughter's life. A life where I was treated with the weary, resentful tolerance one might reserve for a piece of old inherited furniture that you can't quite bring yourself to throw away. After my husband Samuel passed, the quiet of our small paid-off house became a suffocating presence. My daughter Sharon and her husband Reggie had suggested I sell it and move in with them. At the time, it had seemed like a loving, practical solution. They had 2 young children, and they were struggling to make ends meet on their modest salaries. My presence and my monthly pension check would be a help to them, they'd said. It was a lie, of course, but it was a kind lie, and at the time, lost in the fog of my grief, I was grateful for it. So I sold the house, the keeper of my happiest memories, and moved into the small, stuffy guest room in their cramped, perpetually noisy suburban home. The arrangement soured almost immediately. My pension, which I had naively believed would be a welcome contribution, quickly became an expectation. My role in the household was that of an unpaid, unacknowledged domestic servant. I was the first one up in the morning, making breakfast for the children, packing their lunches. I was the one who did the laundry, who scrubbed the floors, who made sure a hot dinner was on the table when Sharon and Reggie came home from their stressful, soul-crushing jobs. Their gratitude was non-existent. It was replaced by a constant low-grade hum of resentment. My presence was a constant reminder of their own financial struggles, a living symbol of their failure to achieve the comfortable middle-class life they felt they deserved. Just last week, we had an incident that laid their contempt bare. I'd made a special Sunday roast, and 2 of Reggie's friends from work stopped by unexpectedly. Sharon, flustered, introduced me not as her mother but as, "This is Martha, Reggie's aunt. She's staying with us for a while." The lie, so casual and so cutting, hung in the air. I said nothing, of course. Later at the dinner table, Sharon started complaining loudly about the price of beef, making a pointed joke right in front of their guests. "We'd eat like this all the time if we didn't have to stretch our budget to support an extra person. Right, honey?" she'd said, nudging Reggie. "Martha's little pension check doesn't exactly cover the filet mignon she likes." The friends laughed awkwardly. I just stared at my plate, my face burning with a silent, powerless shame. My only act of private, hopeful rebellion, my one small ritual that was entirely my own, took place every Friday afternoon. I would take a small amount from my meager personal funds, and I would walk to the corner convenience store. There I would buy a single lottery ticket. It was a foolish, hopeful gesture, a quiet prayer to a God I wasn't sure was listening. I would let my grandchildren, Maya and Noah, pick the numbers, their small fingers jabbing excitedly at the slip of paper. It was our little game, a secret source of magic in a house that had none. And then, I would do something my own mother, a woman of meticulous habits, had taught me to do. I would take a pen from my purse, and on the back of the ticket, on the small unassuming line that said signature, I would carefully, neatly write my own name, Martha Washington. It was a habit, a reflex, an act of ownership over this one tiny, insignificant piece of paper. I would then pin the ticket to the corkboard in the kitchen, a small, colorful beacon of impossible hope amidst the clutter of school notices and overdue bills. The moment the world tilted on its axis came on a Saturday night. The air in the small, stuffy living room was thick with the usual weekend tension. Reggie was slumped on the sofa, mindlessly flicking through channels, a can of beer sweating on the coffee table beside him. Sharon was at the dining table, furiously tapping away at a calculator, the monthly ritual of paying the bills a source of her deepest, most bitter anxieties. The children, Maya and Noah, were on the floor, engaged in a quiet, subdued game with their building blocks. I was in the armchair in the corner, a book open on my lap, though I had been reading the same page for the last half an hour, my mind too weary to absorb the words. The local news channel was on, the volume turned low, a meaningless drone of sports scores and weather reports, and then came the familiar, cheesy, upbeat jingle of the state lottery drawing. And now? The moment you've all been waiting for, the perky blonde announcer chirped from the screen. Tonight's winning jackpot is a life-changing $43 million. Let's go to the numbers. On the screen, a series of white balls tumbled in a clear plastic drum. One by one, they were released, their numbers announced with a dramatic flourish. Normally, we paid no attention. The lottery was my private, foolish fantasy, not a source of genuine family entertainment. But tonight, for some reason, my grandson Noah looked up from his blocks. "Those look like our numbers, Grandma," he said, his small voice clear in the tense silence of the room. Sharon looked up from her calculator, an expression of pure dismissive annoyance on her face. "Don't be silly, Noah," she snapped. "Nobody ever wins that thing." But something in her son's voice, some note of certainty, made her hesitate. Her eyes flickered from the screen to the corkboard in the kitchen, where the small, colorful ticket was pinned. The first number on the screen was 7. The first number on our ticket was 7. The second number was 14. Our second number was 14. A strange, electric silence fell over the room. Reggie sat up a little straighter on the sofa. Sharon put down her pen. One by one, the numbers on the screen matched the numbers that my grandchildren in their innocent wisdom had chosen. 32, 41, 58, and the final all-important Powerball 19. They were all there. A perfect, impossible match. For a long, stunned moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the perky announcer on the television, congratulating the unknown incredibly lucky winner. Then Sharon let out a sound that was not quite a scream, not quite a sob, a raw primal noise of pure unadulterated shock. She scrambled from her chair and lunged for the kitchen, ripping the ticket from the corkboard. She stood there, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with a look of dawning, terrifying belief. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice a hoarse, strangled sound. "Oh my God, Reggie, we won." The dam of their long-repressed hope broke, and the room erupted in a tidal wave of hysterical, life-altering joy. They screamed. They shouted. They grabbed each other and jumped up and down like children, their faces streaked with tears of disbelief. I felt a small, cautious smile touch my own lips. "Oh my goodness," I said, my voice full of wonder. "This will change everything for us." But they didn't hear me. They were already talking over me, their voices loud and manic. "Our new life, baby," Reggie shouted, grabbing Sharon and spinning her around. "No more penny pinching. No more listening to idiots at work. Our mansion, Reggie," Sharon screamed, her eyes wild. "I want one with a pool and a gate. A big gate, and a new car, a white convertible." They were in their own world. A world where I had already become invisible. I, the woman who had bought the ticket, the woman whose name was on the back, sat in my armchair in the corner, a ghost at the celebration of my own miracle. The initial explosive euphoria of their discovery quickly soured into a display of breathtaking, ugly greed. The joy was not a warm, inclusive thing, meant to be shared. It was a sharp, selfish and exclusionary force, a weapon they immediately began to wield against the small, disappointing life they had been so desperate to escape. They did not hug me, they did not thank me. In the whirlwind of their sudden, spectacular fortune, I had ceased to exist. They stayed up all night, their voices loud and manic, fueled by cheap champagne they had rushed out to buy. I retreated to my small, stuffy room, but I could hear them through the thin walls, their words a torrent of wild, avaricious planning. They were no longer the weary, defeated people I knew. They were monarchs, suddenly and unexpectedly restored to their rightful throne, and they were already planning the grand reconstruction of their kingdom. They talked of mansions with swimming pools, of luxury cars, of trips around the world. They talked of quitting their jobs, of telling their bosses exactly what they thought of them, but mostly they talked with a venomous, gleeful contempt about the life they were about to leave behind. They mocked their neighbors, their friends, their own modest home. It was a purge, a verbal bonfire of every perceived slight and every small humiliation they had ever endured. And as the night wore on, and the champagne flowed, their talk turned to me. I heard my name through the wall, spoken by my own daughter with a cold, dismissive cruelty that was more painful than any of her passive-aggressive sighs had ever been. "And the first thing we're doing," I heard her say, her voice slurred with alcohol and arrogance, "is getting Mom out of here. We don't need her pathetic little pension check anymore. We don't need her hovering around, judging us. We're finally free." I lay in my bed, my eyes wide open in the darkness, and I listened as my daughter and her husband planned my disposal. They talked of putting me in a nice retirement home, a place where I would be taken care of. A place where I would be out of sight and out of mind. They spoke of me not as a person, not as a mother, but as a final, inconvenient piece of baggage to be discarded before they could ascend to a new, glorious life. The heartbreak was a physical thing, a cold, heavy weight in my chest. I had given them everything. I had sacrificed my own home, my own peace, my own financial security to help them, to be a part of their family, and in the moment of their greatest triumph, their first instinctual act was to cast me out like a piece of garbage. I did not sleep that night. I simply lay there, in the darkness, and I let the full, ugly truth of their character wash over me. I had always known they were resentful, that they were unhappy, but I had never in my darkest moments imagined the sheer monstrous depth of their selfishness. The next morning they confronted me. They were hungover, their eyes bloodshot, but their faces were alight with a new cruel confidence. They found me in the kitchen, where I was, out of sheer unbreakable habit, making pancakes for the children. They stood in the doorway blocking my exit, a pair of self-appointed executioners. Sharon's voice was cold and dead, devoid of all emotion. "Mom," she said, the word a flat, empty sound. "Reggie and I have been talking, and we've decided it's time for you to find your own place." I continued to flip a pancake, my hand steady, though my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vise. "Is that so?" I said, my voice quiet. "Yes," she said, "our circumstances have changed. We'll be selling this house and we'll be moving to a much better neighborhood. A place where you wouldn't fit in." And then she delivered the final brutal and life-altering line. "We don't need your pathetic pension cash anymore," she said, her voice dripping with the contempt of a woman who had just become a multi-millionaire. "Just go die somewhere else." The words, so ugly, so full of a casual murderous cruelty, hung in the silent pancake-scented air of the kitchen. She had not just asked me to leave. She had in no uncertain terms wished for my death. She had just pronounced my life, and my love, to be utterly worthless to her. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant for 5 long years of quiet, patient suffering, finally irrevocably snapped. In the face of her monstrous life-ending cruelty, a strange and unexpected thing happened. I did not cry. I did not plead. I did not feel the crushing, soul-deep despair that she had so clearly intended to inflict. Instead, a bubble of pure, unadulterated, and slightly unhinged absurdity began to rise in my chest. The sheer, breathtaking irony of the situation was so profound, so perfectly poetically unjust, that it was in its own dark way hilarious. Here she was, my daughter, standing in my kitchen, banishing me from a life I had single-handedly supported, all on the basis of a fortune she believed was hers, a fortune contained in a small slip of paper that I, and I alone, had bought and paid for. The bubble of absurdity rose higher, and it escaped my lips not as a sob, but as a low, quiet chuckle. The sound was so unexpected, so completely at odds with the dramatic, tragic scene they had orchestrated, that it stopped them cold. They stared at me, their expressions of cruel certainty faltering, replaced by a look of stunned, bewildered confusion. My chuckle grew, gaining strength, turning into a full, genuine, and deeply felt laugh. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a profound and terrible release. I was laughing at the sheer cosmic foolishness of it all. I was laughing at them, at their greed, at their monstrous, short-sighted arrogance. I was laughing at the 5 years of my life I had wasted, making myself small to appease these 2 small, petty people. My laughter echoed in the small, tense kitchen, a wild, liberating sound that was utterly terrifying to them. They had expected a victim, and they had found a mad woman. "What are you laughing at, old woman?" Reggie snarled, taking a step forward, his voice a mixture of anger and unease. "Have you finally lost your mind?" "Just ignore her, Reggie," Sharon said, though a new note of uncertainty had entered her voice. "She's senile. The shock has made her crazy." I finally managed to get my laughter under control. Wiping the tears from my eyes, I looked at them, at my daughter and her weak, compliant husband, and for the first time in years I saw them not as my family but as what they truly were, a pair of greedy, foolish children who were about to be taught a very hard, very expensive lesson. I gave them a smile, a wide, genuine smile that held no warmth, no love, only the cold, sharp glint of absolute, unassailable power. And then, through my lingering laughter, I delivered the line that would be the death sentence for all their glittering, avaricious dreams. "Sweetie," I said, my voice dripping with a mock sweetness that was far more cruel than any of her sneers had ever been. "Did you even read whose name is on that lottery ticket? The effect of my simple question was catastrophic. It was as if I had pulled the pin from a grenade and rolled it gently across the linoleum floor. The air in the kitchen crackled with a new, terrifying energy. Sharon's face went through a rapid, fascinating series of transformations. First, a flicker of pure, uncomprehending confusion. Then a wave of contemptuous disbelief. The look of a person who thinks they are dealing with a senile old woman who is talking nonsense. And finally, as the true terrible implication of my words began to dawn on her, a look of pure gut-wrenching and absolute horror. It started in her eyes, a widening of the pupils as her mind scrambled to connect the dots, and then it spread downwards, draining the color from her face, leaving her with a pale, waxy complexion that was almost gray. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice a hoarse, strangled sound. "The numbers matched. We won." "We didn't win anything, dear," I said, my voice still light, still conversational. I turned back to the stove and calmly flipped the last pancake onto a plate. A new, more frantic kind of panic began to set in. Sharon let out a small wounded animal sound, and then she scrambled, with a clumsy, desperate haste, towards the kitchen corkboard. But the ticket wasn't there. "Where is it?" she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "What did you do with it?" "Looking for this?" I asked. I reached into the pocket of my housecoat and pulled out the small, colorful slip of paper. I had taken it down in the middle of the night, while they were busy celebrating their stolen future. Sharon lunged for it, trying to snatch it from my hand, but I was quicker. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger, and with a slow, deliberate movement, I flipped it over. There, on the back, on the single most important line on that entire life-altering piece of paper, were two words, written in my neat, familiar librarian's cursive. A signature, Martha Washington. Sharon stared at my name, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The truth in all its devastating, undeniable finality had finally landed. The $43 million fortune was not theirs. It had never been theirs. It was mine. The silence that followed was a profound, suffocating thing, broken only by the sound of my daughter's ragged, panicked breathing, her dreams, her mansion, her luxury cars, her new life. It all evaporated in the space of a single terrible heartbeat. She had built a glorious, glittering castle in the air, and I had just, with a single simple question, revealed that it had no foundation. The moment the devastating truth settled, the entire dynamic of the room inverted. The cruel, confident executioners of a moment ago were gone, replaced by a pair of desperate, pathetic, and utterly terrified children. The arrogance and contempt vanished from their faces, replaced by a raw, pleading panic that was almost pitiable to behold. Almost. Reggie, seeing his entire future evaporating before his eyes, quickly joined the chorus of groveling. "Martha, please," he begged, his voice cracking with a fear he was no longer trying to hide. "Sharon's right. We were drunk. We were excited. We said some stupid things, but we love you. You know that. Your family." Family. The word coming from his lips was a vile, obscene thing. For 5 years they had treated me as anything but family. I was their servant, their cash machine, their silent, resentful burden, and now, in the face of their own self-inflicted ruin, they were desperately, shamelessly trying to reclaim the very bond they had so thoroughly, and so gleefully desecrated. I looked at them, at their tear-streaked faces, at their pleading, terrified eyes, and I felt nothing. The part of my heart that had once held love for my daughter, the part that had endured years of disrespect in the name of that love, was a cold, dead, and empty space. They had killed it. They had stood over its dying body and gloated. They could not now resurrect it with a few desperate, self-serving tears. I did not respond to their pleas. I simply took the lottery ticket, the small, powerful piece of paper that had become the arbiter of all our futures, and I folded it neatly once and then twice. I slipped it into the pocket of my housecoat. Then I turned and walked, with a calm, unhurried pace, towards my bedroom. Their frantic, pleading voices followed me down the hallway. "Mom, where are you going? Mom, please, let's talk about this. We can share it. It can be for the whole family." I closed my bedroom door. The soft click of the latch, a definitive final sound. I took the single small suitcase that I kept on the top shelf of my closet, a relic from a life of travel with my dear Samuel. I placed it on the bed and began to pack. I did not pack much. A few changes of clothes, my favorite books, a framed photographs of Samuel. I had learned over the past 5 years to live with very little. I had learned to make myself small. I was about to learn how to be large again. When I was finished, I walked out of the room, my suitcase in my hand. They were waiting for me in the hallway, their faces a mess of tearful, desperate hope. I walked past them as if they were not there. I did not look at them. I did not speak to them. I walked through the house that had been my prison, through the front door and out into the bright morning sunlight, ignoring the sound of their frantic weeping pleas that followed me down the driveway. The walk from my daughter's house to the bus stop was less than a mile, but it felt like a journey across a continent. With each step I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the last 5 years begin to lift from my shoulders. The air felt cleaner, the sun warmer, the sky a more brilliant shade of blue than I had seen in a very long time. I was a refugee, but I was a refugee fleeing not from poverty but from a soul-crushing spiritual destitution. I had a $43 million lottery ticket in my pocket, but in that moment my true wealth was the simple, profound and intoxicating taste of my own freedom. I checked into a clean, quiet and completely anonymous hotel near the airport. The room was small and unremarkable, but to me it felt like a palace. It was a space that was entirely my own, a space filled with a blessed, beautiful silence. There was no one to sigh at me, no one to make me feel like a burden, no one to resent my very existence. My phone, which I had silenced, was a frantic buzzing beacon of my daughter's panic. The screen was a solid wall of missed calls and text messages, a digital torrent of desperation. I scrolled through them with a detached clinical curiosity. The messages were a fascinating real-time chronicle of her descent from pleading to fury to outright threats. "Mom, please call me. We can work this out. I'm so sorry. Okay, this isn't funny anymore. You can't just walk away with our money. We are a family. I am calling a lawyer, Mom. You can't do this. That ticket belongs to this household. Answer me. You selfish old woman, you are destroying this family." I read the last message and let out a small, bitter laugh. I had not destroyed the family. I had simply revealed that it had been a hollow, rotten sham all along. I turned the phone off completely, severing the last toxic tie to my old life. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. For the next 2 days I did absolutely nothing. I slept. I ordered room service. I read a novel from cover to cover without interruption. I was recalibrating my own soul, remembering the woman I had been before I had made myself small, before I had forgotten the sound of my own thoughts. The fragile peace of my new solitude was shattered on the 3rd day. A frantic, aggressive banging on my hotel room door jolted me from my peaceful reading. The sound was not a polite knock. It was a desperate, angry assault. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." It was Sharon. I have no idea how she found me. A family phone plan tracker, perhaps, or just a series of desperate calls to every hotel in the area. Her voice was no longer pleading. It was a screech of pure, unadulterated rage. Reggie was with her, his voice a low, threatening murmur in the background. "Martha, don't make us call the manager and have you thrown out. Open the door." I walked to the door and engaged the deadbolt and the security chain, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The fear I had lived with for years was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I spoke through the closed door, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to their hysteria. "You need to leave, Sharon. You are not welcome here. Not until you give us our ticket," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. "That money is ours, and you know it. We'll take you to court. We'll tell them you're a senile old woman who stole it from her own family. Then you do that," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "Hire a lawyer. File your claim. I will see you in court. But you will not be speaking to me again. You will not be harassing me again. This is your final warning. Goodbye, Sharon." I walked away from the door, my back straight, ignoring her renewed screams and the pounding of their fists against the wood. Her voice was a mixture of threats and pathetic weeping sobs. "You can't do this to us, Mom. You're our mother. You're supposed to love us." The pounding continued for another few minutes, a desperate, impotent tattoo of their rage. Eventually the noise subsided, replaced by the firm, authoritative voice of hotel security. I heard the murmur of a confrontation, the sound of Sharon's shrill protests being cut short, and then the heavy, receding footsteps of them being escorted away. I stood in the center of my quiet, peaceful room, and I took a deep, cleansing breath. The last, toxic tie to my old life was well and truly severed. The next morning, I felt ready. On the 3rd day, I felt ready. I turned my phone back on, ignoring the fresh flood of messages from Sharon, and I looked at the back of the lottery ticket. The instructions were clear and simple. I made a phone call to the State Lottery Commission, and spoke to a calm, professional-sounding woman who took my information and scheduled an appointment for me to come in and begin the official prize claim process. The appointment was for the following morning. I felt a quiet, steady sense of purpose settle over me. I was no longer a victim, and I was no longer a refugee. I was a woman with a plan. The headquarters of the State Lottery Commission was a sleek, modern building of glass and steel, a place that radiated an aura of quiet, bureaucratic power. I walked into the lobby feeling not nervous but a profound sense of calm. I was not here to celebrate a windfall. I was here to complete a legal transaction. A polite security guard checked my name against a list and then escorted me to a private upper-floor wing reserved for major prize winners. The atmosphere here was different, more like a private bank than a government orifice. The carpets were thick, the art on the walls was original, and the silence was deep and respectful. I was shown into a beautiful light-filled conference room with a panoramic view of the city. A few moments later a man entered. He was in his 50s, dressed in a sharp but conservative suit, and he had the calm, unflappable demeanor of a man who has seen everything. He introduced himself as Mr. David Carter, the prize claims director. He shook my hand, his grip firm and his smile genuine. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice warm. "On behalf of the state lottery, allow me to be the first to officially congratulate you. Your life is about to change in some remarkable ways." "It already has, Mr. Carter," I said, and he gave me a small knowing nod, as if he understood that my words meant more than just the money. For the next hour he and a team of financial and legal experts walked me through the process. They explained the tax implications, the payout options, the importance of assembling a team of trusted advisors. They were professional. They were thorough, and they treated me with a level of respect I had not experienced in 5 long years. As we were in the middle of signing the first of many documents, the calm of the office was shattered. A commotion erupted in the lobby outside our conference room, a sound of loud, angry voices that grew steadily closer. Mr. Carter's assistant opened the door, her face a mask of apology. "Mr. Carter, I am so sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there is a couple in the lobby, a Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. They are demanding to see you. They claim their mother has their winning ticket." Mr. Carter's calm, professional smile did not falter, but I saw a flicker of weary resignation in his eyes. He had, as he had said, seen it all before. "Thank you, Helen," he said. "I'll handle this." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I simply gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He stood up and walked out of the conference room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I did not follow. I did not need to. I could hear everything. I heard him greet my daughter and her husband with the same polite, professional tone he had used with me. And then I heard Sharon's voice. Shrill and hysterical, a sound that was completely out of place in this serene, orderly world. "That's our ticket," she shrieked. "Our confused old mother, Martha Washington, has it. She doesn't understand what she's doing. She's mentally incompetent. We are the real winners." The ugly, desperate lies tumbled out of her. A final, pathetic attempt to seize a fortune that was never hers. I simply sat there, a silent, unseen witness to my own daughter's final spectacular self-immolation. Mr. Carter let Sharon's hysterical accusations hang in the air for a long moment, the ugly words a stark, jarring contrast to the hushed, professional atmosphere of the lobby. He did not get angry. He did not get flustered. He simply waited, with the patience of a man who has heard every possible variation of this sad, greedy story, until she had finally run out of breath. He then spoke, his voice the very definition of calm, bureaucratic authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," he began, his tone polite but firm. "I understand you are upset. However, I must explain the rules of the state lottery, which are legally binding and non-negotiable." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The ownership of a lottery prize is determined by one thing, and one thing only: the signature on the back of the winning ticket. The person who signs the ticket is by law the sole and exclusive owner of that prize. There are no exceptions." I could hear Sharon start to sputter a protest. But Mr. Carter continued, his voice overriding hers. "We have the winning ticket in our possession. It has been verified and authenticated, and it has been legally signed. The name on the signature line is Martha Washington." Reggie, who had been silent up to this point, finally found his voice, a blustering, impotent rage. "This is ridiculous. We live in the same house. We can prove she used our money to buy the ticket." "Sir," Mr. Carter said, his voice now taking on a new, colder edge of finality, "that is completely irrelevant. It does not matter who bought the ticket or whose money was used to purchase it. The only thing that matters in the eyes of the law and the State Lottery Commission is the signature. The prize belongs to the signatory. In this case, that is Mrs. Washington. The matter is closed. I heard the sound of a security guard approaching, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. Now, Mr. Carter said, his voice a clear final dismissal. If you do not leave the premises immediately, I will have you removed for trespassing. Their frantic arguments, their empty threats of lawsuits, their pathetic, desperate pleas, they were all useless against the cold, hard and unassailable wall of the law. I heard the sound of them being escorted out, their angry, weeping protests fading down the hallway, until they were finally silenced by the closing of the lobby doors. I sat alone in the conference room, the silence that followed feeling like the first day of the rest of my life. Mr. Carter returned a few moments later, his expression once again calm and professional. He gave me a small sympathetic nod. I apologize for that interruption, Mrs. Washington, he said. Shall we continue? We finished the paperwork, my hands steady as I signed the documents that officially made me a multi-millionaire. But the money in that moment felt like a secondary concern. My real prize was the quiet, profound and beautiful finality of that closed door. Their public humiliation at the lottery headquarters was not the end of their efforts. It was merely the end of the beginning. Humiliated, enraged, and now completely consumed by a sense of righteous delusional entitlement, Sharon and Reggie made their final desperate gambit. A week after being thrown out of the lottery office, I was served with a lawsuit. It was a frivolous, pathetic and deeply insulting document, but it was a legal document nonetheless, and it represented their last best hope of stealing the future that I now held. I read the lawsuit in the sunlit living room of the new beautiful brownstone I had just purchased. The absurdity of the situation a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of my new life. The suit filed on their behalf by a cheap bottom-feeding lawyer petitioned the court to have me declared mentally incompetent. It was a vicious, calculated attack filled with lies and half-truths designed to paint me as a senile, confused old woman who was a danger to herself and her own financial well-being. The petition was a work of fiction. It claimed that I suffered from memory loss and delusions, twisting my quiet, reserved nature into a symptom of social withdrawal and paranoia. It used my age as a weapon against me, citing my status as a 68-year-old widow as proof of my vulnerability. The most cruel and twisted part was the claim that the shock of the lottery win itself had unhinged my fragile mind, causing me to act irrationally and against my own best interests. They were trying to use the very miracle that had saved me as the justification for caging me. They were not just asking for the money, they were asking the court to strip me of my autonomy, to take away my freedom and to appoint them, the very people who had wished for my death, as my legal guardians. My new team of lawyers, a group of sharp, high-powered professionals from the best firm in the city, were not amused. They saw the lawsuit for what it was, a desperate, transparent, and legally baseless attempt at extortion. They were ready to fight, and they were ready to win. The court date was set, and for a few weeks I was forced to endure the humiliating process of legal discovery. I had to undergo a court-ordered psychological evaluation, a process that was both intrusive and deeply insulting, but one that I knew was necessary to prove my sanity beyond a shadow of a doubt. The evaluator, a kind but thorough professional, found me to be, in her own words, one of the most sharp, lucid, and mentally sound individuals she had ever had the pleasure of interviewing. The day of the court hearing was a grim, joyless affair. I saw Sharon and Reggie across the courtroom, their faces a mixture of fear and a strange, stubborn defiance. They had convinced themselves they were the victims in this story, the wronged children fighting for their rightful inheritance. The hearing was a mercifully brief and one-sided affair. Their lawyers' arguments were flimsy and easily dismantled by my legal team. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for suffering no fools, grew visibly more irritated with each passing minute of their testimony. The final, decisive blow came when my lawyer presented the judge with the security footage from the hotel, footage of Sharon and Reggie banging on my door, screaming threats and insults. The audio was crystal clear. The judge listened with a look of growing horror and disgust, as my own daughter's voice, filled with a raw, vicious hatred, echoed through the silent courtroom. When it was over, the judge looked at Sharon and Reggie with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. She dismissed their petition with a scathing rebuke, calling it a shameful and malicious abuse of the legal system, and a transparent and disgusting attempt to defraud an elderly parent. She not only threw out their case, but she also ordered them to pay for my entire considerable legal fees. It was a total, absolute, and humiliating defeat. The epilogue to my old life was not an act of forgiveness but a final severing act of maternal duty. In the weeks that followed, as I worked with my new team of financial advisors and lawyers, I made one last provision for my daughter and her husband. I had no desire to see them homeless, no desire for my grandchildren, Maya and Noah, to suffer for the sins of their parents. My grandchildren were the only innocent victims in this entire ugly affair, and it was for them, and them alone, that I made my decision. I had my lawyers set up an anonymous trust. It was not a generous trust. It was a trust designed for survival, not for comfort. It would pay the monthly rent on a small basic 3-bedroom apartment, in a modest working-class neighborhood, a home for my grandchildren. It would also provide a meager monthly stipend, an amount just enough to cover basic utilities and groceries, but not a single penny more. It was a safety net, but it was a low and unforgiving one. Sharon and Reggie would not starve, but they would have to work, they would have to learn. For the first time in their lives, the hard, humbling lesson of self-reliance. I sent them the details of the trust through my lawyer, with a single non-negotiable condition that they never, under any circumstances, attempt to contact me again. The trust was for the children, not for them. They accepted the terms. They had no other choice. My new life began not with a grand extravagant gesture, but with a quiet, joyful act of reclamation. I bought a house, a beautiful light-filled brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. A house that reminded me of the one I had shared with Samuel. And then I began to fill it with books. I haunted old bookstores and auctions, buying first editions of my favorite authors, leather-bound collections of poetry, rare forgotten histories. My home became a sanctuary of stories, a quiet, peaceful monument to a lifetime of loving the written word. My true joy, however, came not from the wealth itself, but from the freedom it provided, the freedom to create a legacy that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with hope. 6 months after I walked out of my daughter's house, I stood on the steps of a beautiful newly renovated building in an underprivileged neighborhood, a neighborhood that had not had its own library in over 50 years. A large banner hung over the entrance. The Washington Children's Library. I had funded the entire project, from the architectural design to the state-of-the-art computer lab to the thousands of brand new books that now lined its shelves. As I cut the ceremonial ribbon and the doors opened, and a flood of excited, joyful children rushed in, their faces alight with wonder, I felt a sense of peace so deep and so profound that it was its own kind of wealth. I was not a resentful old woman. I was not a charity case. I was a librarian, and I was, finally, blessedly home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.